Welcome to Open Arms, an honest conversation about firearms. Hey everybody, I'm your host Brian Lockerman, and today we have a special guest back in the studio. We have Tony Vieira, attorney. Now the reason why we're having him back is because you guys as an audience engaged and you wrote us question after question for Tony. So I figured it was only right to get him back here and answer some of these questions for us. Welcome back, Tony.
Glad to be here.
Oh, I would love to have you here.
Yeah.
So are you ready for these questions yet? Or?
I'm ready to answer some questions, but here's what I suggest is the best way to go about this.
Sure.
I know from listening to you, Brian, that you're all about education, and you should be.
That's true.
So I think probably instead of just launching into questions, the best way to go about this is to just give, let me call it self-defense 101.
Got it. Okay.
So there are general principles
Mm-hmm.
that are based on probably more than 2,000 years of testing these ideas that really relate to this balance of how do we live in a society so that we have the ability to protect ourselves, the ones we love, and other innocent people, while at the same time making sure that we're not making mistakes and harming somebody that didn't need to be harmed.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And that's the balance, and that's the difficult thing. So if we're going to be integral people,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to train not only just in terms of how you handle a firearm, on the range, how you shoot safely and don't end up accidentally shooting someone else, but you also need to put a lot of thought into this issue of self-defense.
Exactly.
And when it's justified and when it's not. And I know there's some questions that not only relate to self-defense of ourselves physically, but also of property and homes and things like that. So we'll get to that.
Yeah.
As
And,
we do.
and some of these questions people did write in for you. I'm interested too. These are all these questions I have too, which is just kind of like nice to see that.
Yeah. So some of these questions, I've looked at some of them ahead of time. I've looked at all of them ahead of time, actually. And some of them I think are easy to answer.
Uh-huh.
Some of them are kind of in the middle,
I
and some of them are out there on the edge, right?
Exactly.
So let me talk to you about that just a little bit, just in terms to give people context. So let's say you're in a case. You're a lawyer. You're defending someone that's been accused of harming someone else, and they're claiming, I did it in self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what would typically happen in court is this: you'd go to court. Both sides are there. You're there as a defense lawyer. The prosecutor's there. The judge is sitting up on the bench. There's no jury in the room, and you're talking about, well, what sorts of evidence is admissible in the case. So, for example, let's say I've got somebody that says, you know what, I was there, and I saw exactly what happened before the defendant shot this person. Right? I saw the aggressive moves that the person that was shot made. I saw whether he had a gun, whether he had a knife, where he was, the look on his face, the things he said, all these things, right? And the judge is he's gonna ask, well, what's admissible, right? And the way he's gonna figure out what's admissible, he's gonna say, do you have a lawful right to self-defense, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that will depend really on the facts that are presented to that judge. So let's say the case goes to the jury, and at the end of the case, you have a similar discussion. And here's that discussion. That discussion involves what the law is. So people may think the law is written down, and that's the law.
Yeah.
End of story. The jury gets the law, they hear the facts, and they make a decision. It's more difficult than that.
All right.
Because in California, as in all states, there's going to be a standard set of what are called jury instructions, which are just simple restatements of the law.
Mm-hmm.
Both sides will actually fight about what the law is. They'll say, no, Judge, you shouldn't give that instruction. You should give this instruction. No, you should give that instruction, but you should change it this way.
Yeah.
So what I'm telling you is that even today, and I'm going to walk you through some of the standard jury instructions in California.
Okay.
Even today, I can tell you this is what the law says. At the end of the day, if you ever found yourself in front of a hostile jury or with a hostile prosecutor, you're still going to be fighting about what the law actually is.
Yeah.
So this is not an easy thing.
Oh, I can imagine.
So at the end of the day, I think the moral is you got to be very careful when you're defending yourself, someone else, or even your property.
That's true.
Very
True.
careful.
That's
And you
true.
got to educate yourself. So let's
Yes.
start that process, all right?
Education.
All right, so here we go.
All right.
So the general principle, the most general principle of law is this. I'm going to read you out of one of the standard jury instructions. We've got it here. A defendant is not guilty of a crime if he used force against the other person if the defendant reasonably believed that he was in imminent danger of suffering bodily injury.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's the first thing. Did you believe you were in imminent danger of suffering bodily injury? Right?
Gotcha.
So let's assume.
Okay, got a question.
Yeah, go ahead. Fire away.
Sorry to interrupt you. Okay, with that said, do you have to show proof to that though, or is it just you're just saying that it's your words? You need that proof.
Well, let's. Well, the answer is the prosecutor's always going to have the burden of proof, but you're going to be, if you were a defendant, you're alleging self-defense, you're going to want to put on some proof.
Exactly.
Right. So let's say you say, look, I knew this guy, and he said, someday I'm going to shoot you. Well, that's not imminent.
Yeah.
Imminent, in most cases, will mean immediate. That you thought you were in imminent danger, immediate danger of harm, and had to react. You didn't have any time to leave, to call the cops, to do to engage in any other sort of conduct, so that you might get yourself reasonably out of the situation without, suffering some harm.
Yeah.
Right. And so what that does, and this is a good point to kind of, stop and make a point. Maybe somebody says that and they're not really legit. I mean, they're just talking, right? They're talking smack, right?
Yeah.
You don't get to shoot them, right? You've got to say, okay, this is not something immediately dangerous to me, right? Well, let me give you another example. What if you've been kidnapped and you're in somebody's basement and there's nobody else is around? Nobody else knows you're there. You've got this crazy man who's got you kidnapped in his basement. And he says, in 7 days, I'm going to kill you. Well, guess what? That's a whole different situation.
Yeah.
Right? Because nobody's going to come and save you. So let's say in the intervening period, you have a chance to do something to protect yourself. You need to take that chance to protect yourself, right? The point is the facts really will matter.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
But the rule of thumb is that it has to be an immediate, you have to be in imminent danger of harm. That's the first one, okay?
Okay.
Now, you need to actually believe that. In other words, you can't just make it up, right?
Yeah.
You actually have to believe it.
Yeah.
And it has to be reasonable, right? It's not only you that has to buy off on that, but that jury has to buy off on that as well, okay? And then the third element when it comes to just this general notion is that you used a reasonable amount of force. It has to be proportional, right?
Okay.
So let's say somebody says, I'm going to smack you, right? You can't shoot him, right? Maybe you push him away. It's always proportional, right? So this is not something that we just dreamt up today. Just as a moral matter, you got to think to yourself, okay, what is the danger that's being presented to me now? I need to use that reasonable amount of force in repelling this danger. Last time I was here, I talked about this notion that self-defense always has to be reasonable.
Yep.
That's true. There's a bunch of gray in that.
Yeah, that's true.
But this is part of what's reasonable. Is it imminent, right? Do I really believe it and reasonably believe it? And is it the sort of, and I have to use a proportional amount of force. I can't kill somebody because they're going to smack me.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay?
Yeah.
So that's just generally, kind of the foundation. Now, let me give you just a couple more specifics, all right? So again, I'm looking at what are just the standard jury instructions here in California.
Okay.
I can't tell you what the law is in Colorado, but all the factors are going to be similar sorts of considerations. So let me give you an example of a way in which the states can vary. We've all heard in the context of some of the high-profile media cases about this notion of the right to stand your ground.
Yeah.
right? So there are several states in which you have no right to stand your ground. You have a duty to retreat if you can,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you can't, you can't. But if you can, you have to. In many other states, you don't have that obligation to retreat. You can simply stand your ground, right? Um, so in your state, it's going to be one way probably or the other, or the law in the state will have no affirmative statement on that whatsoever, because that can also be the case, right?
Yeah.
In which case, whether you should have retreated or not will in all likelihood be a function of whether or not it was reasonable for you to retreat.
Mm-hmm.
So we come back around, and this gets complicated,
Oh yeah, no, I
right?
know it.
Um, so at every juncture, you've got to be asking yourself, am I being reasonable? And you've got to think, okay, do I really need to do this? Because if you don't, you need to not engage,
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
But if you do, guess what? You got to do what you got to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
No one can tell you ahead of time whether you should or shouldn't. It's up to you, but you've got to educate yourself on these things. Most
Absolutely.
of these things are intuitive, but you need to have thought about it ahead of time, especially if what you're thinking about is defending yourself with a firearm, which involves lethal force. Okay,
Gotcha. Gotcha.
let me give you a couple other things. Um, there are jury instructions in California that deal with the right to self-defense in the context of mutual combat, right?
Okay.
So let's say you and I are talking smack,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we're insulting each other, and all of a sudden somebody gets angry,
Yeah.
right? Trying to start a fight, right? Well,
Yeah.
we've engaged in mutual combat. I don't have the right to self-defense in that case, neither do you, right? Except under certain circumstances. Now, the reason I'm going to tell you about this is not because I think this is particularly important, except to show you that these are not easy issues to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to continually make that point. There's so much gray in all this, and the facts matter.
Oh yeah, I totally understand.
Right. So, in the case of mutual combat, I can reclaim the right to self defense if I say, Brian, I don't want to get in a fight. If I stop, right?
Uh-huh.
And then I indicate that I really mean that. I really don't want to stop. I mean, I don't really want to fight,
Yeah.
right? Then and then I give you a chance to stop, right? Then I regain the right to self-defense. But if you think about it for just a moment, you can say, you know what, that actually makes some sense. If two guys are just being ignorant and
Mm-hmm.
engaging in mutual combat, then they why should they claim the safe harbor of self-defense, right?
Yeah.
Because they did it. They did it openly and belligerently. But if you say, you know what, this was ignorant. I shouldn't have done this. Let's quit.
Uh-huh.
Then I'm in the safe harbor position again. Let me give you a couple other things because these are going to relate to some of the. And we'll be done with this little self-defense 101, but in just a minute here. So there is another jury instruction
Okay.
um, that deals with situations where the original danger as it presented itself no longer exists, or where the attacker is disabled. Okay,
Gotcha.
and you're going to imagine that you know where this is going, and you're right, right? So let's say that I engage in lawful self-defense. Somebody threatens me. It's legitimate. It's immediate. I'm reasonable in my apprehension of it, and I use proportional force to repel that. Right. So I fit within all those criteria that I need to be in the safe harbor of self-defense. Right.
Okay.
And that guy's down, and he's not gonna be able to do anything. He's disabled,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't stop.
Mm.
Right. Now I'm in trouble because I have disabled him. I have repelled the attack, but I didn't stop,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So let's go the awful direction of somebody being shot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the first two shots take the guy down and he's done, but I don't quit.
Mm.
I come with 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah,
I'm in
that's
trouble,
the problem. Yep.
right? And I hope and believe that everybody listening to this can understand the logic of all of this. It actually makes some sense.
Oh yeah, no, 100%.
Right. So let's go with just a couple more, and then we'll go to the questions. So
Sounds good.
somebody I think asked a question about the right to protect either personal property that is stuff that they have,
Hmm.
a business, or a home. Those may be very different in how the law applies to each of those situations. So I have the right to eject somebody from real property, right? So let's say I own a field and some guy's out in my field, right? So in California, here's what the law says, and this is just a partial statement, but it'll get you the gist of it.
Okay.
The owner of a property may request that a person leave the property, which you would think would be reasonable. Hey,
Yeah.
get off my ground,
Yeah.
right? If the trespasser does not leave within a reasonable time, right? So you're giving the guy a chance to get off the property. The reason I say guy is because women very rarely commit crimes. It's always a man.
Really?
Almost. All right. And it would appear to a reasonable person that the trespasser poses a threat. The owner may use reasonable force to make the trespasser leave, right? So that person has to oppose a threat,
Okay.
right?
Gotcha.
You can't just attack,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So the law actually is saying, look, this is a human being. You can't attack him.
Hmm.
Call the police.
Gotcha.
He poses a threat, then now we're probably in self-defense range, right? But once again, it's just proportional. It's just reasonable force.
Yeah.
You know, get off my property. You push him off.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You can't shoot somebody. You can't club them,
Uh-huh.
right? Now, if something happens and they get violent and they pull out a gun, it's a whole different thing now,
Exactly.
right?
It's
Facts
change-
matter.
changes the whole
These
thing.
things get very complicated.
Yeah.
If the trespasser resists, the owner may increase the amount of force he uses in proportion to the force used by the trespasser. Same sort of thing.
Yeah.
All right, let's go on and talk about just one or two more things. I believe last time you asked me about protection of the home. So basically, that's the castle doctrine.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Once again, this is a question of reasonable. What's reasonable, right?
Exactly.
Whether there's a reasonable
Mhm.
threat, whether
Mhm.
whether it's a present immediate threat,
Yeah.
and the level of response required, right?
Gotcha.
So let's just talk about a home for a moment because I think that's always a question of some interest,
Mhm.
right? Let me give you the law there, and then we'll be done and go on to the questions.
Okay.
In the state of California, typically it's the case that the prosecutor has the burden of proving all elements of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
I've heard this many times.
Yeah, of course.
Right? There are some situations in which there are things that are called presumptions. In other words, even if there is any particular evidence one way or the other, it's presumed to be one way or the other. The law actually
Yeah.
kind of builds in a bias, right? So when it comes to protection of your home, right?
Hmm.
So let's say someone comes in my house, and there's an intruder, not a guest or my kid or anybody else, but there is an intruder that unlawfully and forcibly enters my home. Think about that,
Yeah.
right? If we just think about those right now, we're thinking this guy has not got my best interest in
Uh-huh.
mind, right?
Uh-huh.
And I knew that that person unlawfully and forcibly entered my home. He's not a member of my household, as I said, and he uses force intended to cause death or great bodily injury inside the home, right?
Yeah.
Then the law presumes that any force that I used was lawful.
Gotcha.
Right?
Gotcha.
Now, the kind of a weird thing about that is there's this requirement that he use. No, this is in a situation where I use force intended to cause death or great bodily injury to protect my home.
Hmm.
The law has given me that presumption. Well, you'd think, well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of common sense. If somebody comes in your home by force, you ought to be able to do that. Not a big deal. It seems logical. It is logical. The law presumes that you were acting lawfully.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of the primer.
Okay.
All right. There are other aspects to the
Of
law,
course.
but I think that's enough for now. just to show people something that I spoke about last time, and that is there is gray in all of this.
I know it well. I
It's
know it.
not easy,
Yep.
and sometimes these questions can be answered affirmatively, and sometimes they can't.
I'm well aware of that, and
Yeah.
I know that for a fact. Okay, well, are you ready for a couple questions then?
Let's go.
Let's do question number one. This comes from Brian L. He wants to know, how do you maintain such a good suntan throughout the winter months?
Well, I think
I'm
that.
kidding, buddy.
No. I got to answer that question. Come on.
Is it the suntan lounge or what?
No. But I probably wouldn't admit it if it was.
I'm just messing.
I'm out there in that pool. You know that, Brian.
I know it. Okay, let's start here. Let's start with Leonard S. He writes in, I witnessed an armed robbery on the streets. Am I allowed to pull my gun to help the person that is in need?
All right. So let's. I've got those two. I want to look at that myself. All right. All right. This is where he's witnessing an armed robbery.
So there's armed robbery going on.
Yeah.
I've always wondered this too.
Yeah.
Armed robbery going on, and someone's in danger. You're lawfully carrying, your CCW holder, carrying your sidearm.
Yeah.
Are you allowed to engage?
Yeah. So in California,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know where he's at.
Gotcha.
Right. I can't possibly know the law of all 50 states.
That's true.
But in California, you can engage in lawful self-defense of another. And all those principles that I talked about
Mm-hmm.
all operate whether I'm defending myself, my child,
Mm-hmm.
right, or someone else,
Gotcha.
right? So, for example, let's just take it a little bit differently. Let's say you see some big guy beating up some small female,
Uh-huh.
right? Can you intervene to protect her? Absolutely, right?
Okay.
You can. The law doesn't tell us that we have obligations to these things, but I think the law just. Some people think the law is dead and lifeless, but to me, this is just a recognition that we are supposed to protect other people.
Exactly.
That is what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
But when you intervene, it's got to be proportional.
It's like, do you remember the last episode of Seinfeld when a guy was getting robbed and they just and Jerry and Kramer are just looking at him and watching him getting robbed, and the police came and arrested them for not engaging? Oh my God, that was the funniest episode. I loved it.
Well,
it was hilarious.
yeah, that's good. That's good.
Okay, so yeah, you kind of answered that question pretty good here. All right, let's try this now. This is from Tracy C. Somebody harmed one of my family members. Am I allowed to go after them for that reason?
Well, I mean, it depends, Tracy, right? So remember when we talked about this, let's say that it's already been done,
Mm-hmm.
right? So going back to our original three elements, the notion that they're going to harm them isn't imminent.
Yeah,
It's not immediate.
you're right.
It's already passed,
You're right.
right? The harm is past. The danger has passed.
Mm-hmm.
Not that
So-
that you can't go after them
So
legally.
you can't just go legally go after them just because they already did the deed.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I got that.
So
I got that.
so let's set that hook a little harder, okay?
Yeah.
So let's assume that someone harms my family member,
Mhm.
right? I find out about it a couple days later, right? Can I go after them? Well, the answer is no.
No. Gotcha.
Right.
Easy. I kind of figured that one
Right.
out on my own.
Right.
Okay, let's check this one out. This is from Ray L. I was getting verbal threats from somebody saying they are going to kill me, and then they showed up at my house. When am I allowed to possibly pull out my firearm to protect myself? That's kind of a gray question. It's kind of a, not enough information. Like, is the guy armed or not? But he's talking about if a guy just comes to the house and say, "I'm going to kill you," what can you do?
Yeah. So let's say I for whatever reason have an enemy. Let's say there's somebody jealous of me because I have a tan in the wintertime. Okay.
Yeah, there
Let's
you
just
go.
take that sort of situation, right? And he shows up at my house. He rings on the doorbell. I open the door. He's like, "I hate your guts. I'm going to kill you."
Uh-huh.
Right?
Right? No.
he's just
Yeah.
crazy. I mean, he might even be crazy just for
Yeah.
asking me that question,
Yeah.
about my tan. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
But
I kind of figured that
right,
one
so
too.
it's the same thing. You got to keep asking yourself: is it a harm that's reasonable? It's real, right?
Yeah.
I have to be proportional if I do respond, and it's a sort of a harm that really needs to be something that I am immediately concerned is going to happen to me,
Gotcha.
not something down the line.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Here's a good one here. This is a really good one. This is from Gus T. I was driving on the freeway and someone cut me off and started road rage. They then show me a weapon. Am I allowed to defend myself with my firearm, being that I am a CCW license holder?
Okay, so let me answer that in this way. The principles, the fundamentals remain the same, right? So I can imagine sitting on a jury,
Okay.
listening to that case, right? So let's assume that he pulls out his weapon and fires it and doesn't hit the guy, but discharges the weapon, right? I can imagine, let's say some prosecutor says, I'm going to prosecute this case, brings him to court, and he's sitting there in that defendant's seat. I can imagine a juror saying, well, you know what, the guy just brandished the weapon.
Yeah.
There's a lot of clowns out there that brandish weapons,
Mhm.
right? Did he point it at him, right? Did he what was it that sort of a situation, or did he just hold the weapon up
Uh-huh.
and show it to him, right? So facts matter.
Yeah.
Going back to that fundamental notion, the answer is I can't tell you, but that sounds like a situation where you got to be very, very careful.
Careful. Yeah, I do agree. And I think if I was in that situation, what I would probably do first is just try to get away from the road rager dude. Now,
Absolutely.
if he would hunt me down and follow me down and try to, do a pit maneuver on me or whatever and jump out of his car or whatever, then there's another story.
Whole different thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, that was a good question. I was thinking about that
Yeah,
myself.
no, these are all good questions.
Yeah. Okay, let's see who we got here. We got John K. When someone comes into my home and starts vandalizing it, am I allowed to use any type of force to stop them?
Yeah. So let's go back to something that I think we talked about a little bit, and that is this notion of the castle doctrine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is not, based on the question, this is not a situation where he's being physically threatened. It's his property.
His property, exactly.
It's his property that's being endangered, right? And basically, in the home, your response is you have to be reasonable, right? Leave my house, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to use reasonable force, right?
Correct.
So let's say somebody comes in and they start, I don't know, they go to your dish cabinet and start throwing your plates around, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to shoot the guy.
No.
You're going to grab the guy and you're going to say stop. Maybe you're going to get into a fight,
Exactly.
right? Proportional response,
Gotcha.
even in your home,
Yeah.
right?
Do you remember the story of the couple that I guess it was Black Lives Matter, were busting down their gate and everything like that? They went outside he was holding his AR, she was holding her.
Folks in St. Louis.
Yeah.
This guy was a lawyer.
And then they got in trouble for that.
Right.
I mean, I just think that's a little bit absurd, if you ask me.
Yeah, I don't know what the law is in the state of Missouri, but I think that was a ridiculous prosecution.
Oh, it was totally, 100%.
Yeah.
No, but that was a good answer to that question, really. It was awesome. Okay, here's one for you. Ted S. I'm a business owner, and someone comes in my store, even though they are not armed, but I think they're going to try something to harm me. When am I allowed to use my right to defend myself?
Okay, so Ted, the answer is basically the same because the fundamentals don't change, right?
Gotcha.
Right? If there is an imminent danger of harm, right?
Mm-hmm.
You really believe it,
Yeah.
right? And who knows what facts you know, right?
Exactly.
Maybe you've known this person before. This person's made threats before. You know something about him and his conduct with respect to other people,
Yeah.
or whatever it is. Your response in defending yourself has to be proportional.
Exactly. You know, I had a couple who came to me to get trained for a gun because they had a business. And a disgruntled employee was coming and threatening them.
Uh-huh.
One day he showed up at their house with a ton of 5-gallon gas cans filled in his car and rammed their house because he wanted to blow their house up.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was nuts. Now, in a case like that, I mean, what are they allowed to do about that?
I think you call in the F-15,
Right?
right?
That's just crazy.
Yeah,
you know?
that's nuts.
I know it.
Yeah.
All right, here's one for you. We probably only have time for one more question, but here we go. This is from David G. We had a break-in, and they were armed. Can I use my gun to protect myself and my family, or do I have to wait until they fire their gun first, and then I have the right to use my firearm? So he's basically saying someone breaks in, and they are brandishing an arm. Is he still allowed to defend himself before they fire a round off, or where does that kind of lie?
Yeah. So it seems to me that you're fairly safe in assuming that if somebody is forcibly broken in your house, they have a weapon, and they've pointed the weapon at you, right?
Yeah.
You're fairly safe in doing what you need to do to protect yourself,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
We go back to that case in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
You and I look at that case and we say, all those people did was they held their weapon
Yeah,
up,
that was it.
right? Because people had broken through the gate,
Uh-huh.
were threatening to burn his house down and kill his dog or whatever it
Yeah.
was that they were threatening to do. So I always, caution people because at the end of the day, Brian, you're not the judge.
Exactly.
Tony, I'm not the judge.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the prosecutor, and Brian's not the prosecutor, and you don't know how hostile people are going to be to what are constitutional rights.
Yeah.
Right. The Second Amendment is part of this issue. Self-defense isn't actually a constitutional right. It's much deeper than that.
Oh yeah.
But all of these things line up. So when
Yeah.
people have hostility to firearms, often they'll have hostility to people protecting themselves, and all these sorts of things. So
That's correct.
the short answer to the question is, I think you'd be fine.
Yeah.
I know what I would do in
Of
that
course.
situation, but I can't say that for sure.
Yeah.
Because you don't know at the end of the day whether you got somebody on the other end with an agenda
I know.
who's coming at you.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah. So be
Yeah,
careful. Be
exactly.
very careful.
Well, Tony, I really thank you for coming in to answer these questions. Again, viewers, thank you for writing in these questions. I'm loving this stuff. If you have any more questions, please feel free to write us, and we'll get Tony back on to answer anything else you have a question about. Until next time, this is Brian Lockerman saying, don't ever forget safety, family, and the Second Amendment.